Hey there, listeners, and welcome to another episode of the Earth Station One podcast. That's right, folks, we're back, and we got Kolchak, the Night Stalker. We actually talked about Kolchak way back, and it was actually 8 years ago this week. We actually did in episode 285 of Earth Station One. We actually talked all about Kolchak, the Night Stalker, mostly about the series and such. And actually, Mark was on that episode. And it was an interesting conversation, and it's been quite some time. And we thought it's time to explore the world of Kolchak again. And hopefully, we won't talk about that wonderful remake they did a couple years back. So I don't think that's going to be on anyone's list. The only person who was ever Kolchak was Darren McGavin, according to me.
Yeah.
So I think it's going to be a great one for us to talk about tonight. Of course, Mr. Mark Maddox is here. We couldn't do this without him.
Well, thanks for having me on. You guys know how much I love this subject, so I appreciate it.
Okay, and joining us for the very first time, another Mark Dawidziak.
Thank you for having me. Good to be
Mark,
here.
great to have you, sir. And you want to tell everyone a little bit about yourself?
Well, I begin and end just by saying I'm a writer. I've written or edited about 25 books, and the resume is schizophrenic as hell. So, I mean, whenever anybody says, well, what kind of books do you write? And it's kind of, what do you got? That runs the gamut from books about classic television, like Night Stalker and Columbo and The Twilight Zone, to books about Mark Twain. My most recent book is a biography of Edgar Allan Poe. So I've written fiction, nonfiction. If there's a way to make money by pushing nouns against verbs, I've probably done it.
Oh,
So
that is awesome. That is really awesome. Well, welcome to the show, sir.
thanks. It's good to be here.
So we're going to have two mics and two Marks. So this is going to be a fun one for you, Gordon.
Absolutely, absolutely. I am also glad to be here again. Like always, every week. Howdy, and
Good to have you, my friend.
absolutely. And we are continuing to count down to Halloween. So, and as you said, we did talk about Kolchak a while back, and but there's it's so amazing to me that this little show that is two movies, two made for TV movies, and what is it, a few episodes of one
20,
season,
20
20
episodes.
20 episodes.
20 episodes.
Yeah.
Like, still there's still so much to uncover and talk about. Like, it seems like there's just stuff about this endlessly, even if the show itself, or regarding its influence, which is still felt today. And also, I do know that the series itself is celebrating 50-year anniversary this year. So not 50th anniversary of the character, because the first movie was before that, but aired before that. But the actual series celebrates the 50th year. So it's a milestone in a lot of ways. Makes us all feel old, I'm sure.
For sure.
So,
Well, me oldest of all, probably, because 50 years ago I was starting college, and I was starting towards a journalism degree at George Washington University, and I basically had decided that because of Carl Kolchak.
wow.
And that was the
Wow.
exact same month, September 1974, that the series started. I was starting work at towards a journalism degree. So yeah, my bones are creaking right now.
Absolutely. And well, we're all getting there. So that's for sure. And I guess we can just get right into it then. And Mark, I am curious as to how you first discovered Kolchak. Like, I mean, you must have been there sort of like when the first movie aired. Were you right there from the start?
I was 15. I became a horror fan at the age of 7. And I saw a movie on. I grew up in the New York area. Dear old WPIX Channel 11 showed Abbott and Costello Meet Frankenstein. When I was 7 years old, I was there for the Abbott and Costello half of that title. I didn't know what a Frankenstein was at 7 years old, but by the end of that film, I had been transformed into a horror fan. So, I was, we didn't have this term back then. We now talk about people like us as monster kids. That's become a popular. We didn't have that phrase in the 60s. We were just horror fans. And that's a later thing that we sort of cooked up as a label for people who had that kind of shared childhood.
Right.
So by the time I was 15, I'd seen an awful lot of this stuff. And The ad started around October, early October. It was a great ad campaign. It was one of the best ad campaigns that ABC ever came up with. And you couldn't tell from the ads, from the commercials, whether it was a real vampire or not. You know, it was done real cagely. When I wrote the book, the history of the Kolchak character, I was a full-time TV critic at the time, and one of my contacts at ABC was a publicist named Dan Duran. And I said to Dan, "Do you remember a movie called The Night Stalker? I'm writing a book about it." He said, "Yeah, yeah, yeah." I said, "Well, do you remember who handled the ad campaign? I want to talk to him." He said, "I did." And I said, "Well," so I said, "Tell me about it. You know, tell me about." So, and the ads just sort of built the. By the time we reached January, it was at a fever pitch. Everybody was talking about this. Everybody was talking about, even people who weren't horror fans were sort of like, "Are you going to watch it?" "Yeah, I'm going to watch it." "Are you kidding?" There was this buzz that had been built because of these commercials going into this. And you have to remember that in October of 71, ABC aired Brian Song, one of the most acclaimed TV movies of all time. It set the ratings record for TV movies. It held it for all of like 7 or 8 weeks, because Night Stalker airs in January and breaks the record all to hell after that. Everybody was watching it. And you know, if you look at what the rating was, the rating was a 33.4. Now, to put that into English, Nielsen sells, or used to sell, according to households. So 33.4 was the percentage of TV households which were tuned into the Night Stalker, which means more than a third of the country was watching, because most households have more than one person, right? So we know that. And then there's what's called the share. The share is the percentage of people who are actually watching TV at a certain time, because not everybody's watching TV at the certain right now. The four of us are not watching television right now. We're not an available audience. So the share is how many people actually watching television were watching your show at that time. Night Stalker got a 54 share.
Damn.
Wow.
54, which means more than 1 out of 2 people watching the Night Stalker. And yet, you know, now I taught a class, Vampires in Film and Television, for 10 years at Kent State. I taught it each semester, spring, fall, for 10 years. And we would go decade by decade. We'd start with Nosferatu and work our way through. And we get to the 70s, and I would always tell my kids, "You're about to see the best known unknown vampire film of all time." And they look at you like, "Oh yeah, you know, you can't put one past us." And I said, "Okay, The Night Stalker." Not a one ever knew it. Not a one ever recognized the title.
Wow.
And yet, you know, this goes on to influence everything that they liked. The rolling thunder of influence of the Night Stalker. You know, everybody who goes on to do horror, you pick it up in the 90s, you go like 15, 20 years later, just perfect. Right after that, everybody who does Buffy the Vampire Slayer, The X-Files, Men in Black, all this grim supernatural,
Fright Night,
yes, all of it, they're all avowed Night Stalker. They all will tell you this is what did it for me. So they were influenced. And now the great thing about this movie was, when I would show it in class, was when the lights came up, these kids were just gobsmacked. They loved it. They absolutely loved this movie. And you're talking about an ancient movie to these. You're talking 19, 20-year-olds. This is an ancient movie. It's got no special effects to speak of, no CGI, no budget, you know.
Shot in like a week, right?
And yet the magic that worked then still works on a 19 and 20-year-old today, if they give it a chance, if they see it. So that's the magic of it. Yes, it's a fandom that, you know, tends to be confined to a small, tight group that knows what you're talking about when you say Kolchak and when you say Night Stalker. It's very devoted. It's very loyal. Thank goodness. But it's not something which has jumped generation to generation. You know, it's up to people like us to sort of keep that flame going.
Yeah, absolutely. Mark, did you see it when it first aired?
Yes. I remember I was in the 4th grade, and I wasn't a very happy kid at the time. My dad was in Vietnam. You know, we didn't go any place. My mom didn't really like driving, so we didn't I had that whole 2 years my dad was gone. I never went to a movie theater or anything like that. But television, comic books, that's when I was getting into comic books. But these ads started up for this TV movie, and I'll never forget those lines. The lines that sold me that Mark is talking about is him yelling, "This nut thinks he's a vampire. He's killed 4, maybe 5 women. But this nut thinks he's a vampire." I'm already going like, I'm already leaning in. The first time that first preview came on, and every time that preview came on, I'm like, please be a vampire. Please be a vampire. Please be a vampire. I mean, don't be some psycho nut. We'll save that for years later on Starsky and Hutch with John Saxon. Just don't. And when people were building up slowly to this thing, and that's why it got the colossal ratings that it did. And the night that I watched it, I turned that TV set off, and I was not disappointed. I was ecstatic about what I had just seen. It was beautifully made, wonderful acting, bunch of great character actors in it. It was tight. There was no excess. There was no, picking lint out of your navel scenes. I'm not gonna say it was like everything built towards this ending. And then the anti-hero or the screw over thing at the end where he gets ousted. It was brilliant. It was absolutely brilliant. And then the next day in school, kids were talking about it, including, as Mark said, the people who weren't even horror film fans had watched it, and they were talking about it too. It was one of those moments where, things kind of broke through the wall of the nerd bubble, pre the word nerd, I guess. But and people loved it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Mike, what about you? Do you recall the first time you saw it?
Oh, the first time I saw the movie, I actually was introduced to the TV series first, because the local CBS station in Washington, D.C., probably I was in 9th grade by this point, or maybe even 10th grade. A friend of mine told me about it. They showed instead of on Friday nights, they did a horror show, type thing. And they showed every Friday night the Night Stalker series. And so I watched that, and, then me and my friend Dale used to get together on Saturday and like, did you watch it? Oh, did you see it? And, we used to just talk about all the episodes and everything. We didn't know anything about the movie. We just thought it was a TV series. And I actually didn't even see the movie. Probably my senior of high school, probably. I was at a Creation Con, and they were doing a panel on Kolchak the Night Stalker. And they actually had Darren McGavin there at the time.
Wow.
And he came and he was talking about it, and they were talking about the vampire movie, and I was like, vampire movie? What vampire? Type thing. And then they were talking about Night Strangler taking place in Seattle, and it was just like, I've got to find these. And VHS was just starting up at the time, and these things weren't available yet, and I had to get a bootleg copy of it to watch it the first time. And it was taped off TV or something, and and it was like it was staticky. It was crap, but I loved every second of it that I was watching about it. And the big screw over, and how he was the only one who believed it, and even the FBI agent who was there helping him at the vampire's house was like, I'm not saying anything, I don't want my job gotten rid of and everything. And it was just like, oh, the total screw over. Then watching Night Stalker and loving that, and it was like, Oscar Goldman, oh my god, type thing. And so it was, for me, it was the opposite. I was introduced to the TV series more first, when I was younger, and it had more of an impression on me than the two movies did.
That was one of the things about that. The Night Stalker was huge in the around 73. Then the TV series came on. It was on for a little while. Then it went away, and then it got a second breath of life. This is what Mark was talking about, that this hasn't jumped, but there was a little bit of it for a little while because of the CBS late movie picking up younger people that were, staying up now and watching the 11:30 at night CBS late movie. They were picking up, which they normally had used to do just monster movies on Friday night for years, and then they started putting TV shows in there, and it kind of reinvigorated it for a while, and then it seemed like it kind of went dormant again. Books and Blu-rays and stuff are helping a little bit now, but I don't know how much.
Yeah, I can tell you that my history with it is very sparse. I mean, I didn't see the series until we had recorded our episode on it in 2015.
Really?
Yeah, I hadn't seen any of the series, and I still at that point didn't see either of the movies because they were not easily accessible. And they're still not tremendously easily accessible. Like, you can't just stream this show. You can't just stream these movies. You can find them. I think Mike found his copy on someone had put it up on YouTube.
There's some really good high quality copies of both movies up on YouTube. We spent the weekend watching movies.
I know that Kino Lorber has done a great job of putting together the series and the TV movies separately. Each movie is separate, and the TV series. So if you get the series, you don't get the two original movies. The movies are separate. They're all available on Blu-ray now. But even that, I think they're out of print from Kino Lorber. So I don't even know if you can get them that way. At least I looked into it anyway. I was able to get them in order for this show. That was one of the reasons why I wanted to do this show, because sometimes this podcast dictates what I watch. So because I don't have time to watch just anything else because I'm too busy watching stuff for the podcast. So I'm like, let's do Kolchak again because I need an excuse to finally see these two movies, Night Stalker and Night Strangler. So I was able to find a DVD that came out, I think, a few years ago. It's a double feature. It's like one of those discs that you flip over or whatever. But it's still good quality. Has interview on both with Dan Curtis, and that's cool. So I hadn't seen the original movies until just this past week. And I got to tell you, I think I enjoyed the movies together, both of them. I think more than I enjoyed the series, and we can talk, I guess, a little bit more about that. But and I like the series too. It didn't like completely blow me away, but I think the movies hold up pretty well, especially that first one. And I really like the spoilers for anybody who hasn't seen any of the stuff. But the thing that really just sort of stunned me was that Kolchak just straight up murders a vampire at the end. I mean, we know he's a vampire, but to everybody else, it's just like he just straight up
homicide.
He just straight up takes matters into his own hands. And I don't know. I always thought that he was more of a sort of reporter than an action guy, and that really surprised me. And I thought it was a pretty cool, bold move. But the way it's shot and everything like that is just really well done. It holds up. I think people, if they haven't seen it, they should check it out for sure. Because I do think it's, as Mark pointed out, it's one of those I think you said it. It's one of those. It was really popular at the time, but it's not as well known now. And it does have its select fans for sure. I was at a small little convention just this weekend, and the guy I was sharing a table with, Bobby Nash, contributed to the 50th anniversary collection that Moonstone just came out with. And we ran across a guy who really loves Kolchak, and the collection is not inexpensive. The hardcover collection that Bobby had is $50.
Whoa!
That guy didn't even blink an eye. Like, Kolchak stuff, give it to me. Whatever you have, that's Kolchak, give it to me. I'll pay whatever for it. And I think it's because that, this is something that those people who know Kolchak and like Kolchak, there's so little of it out there that they'll grab onto anything. And the anthology is good quality. Don't get me wrong. I'm not saying that it's not. So, but it's just, I think right before we started recording, we talked about the sort of licensing thing, and I want to get into that in a little bit. But before we do that, let's go back to like why, like what is it about this the movie, the two movies, the concept, the series, et cetera, that you feel is so influential? Why did it make an impact, even though it didn't at the time last that long? Like it only lasted one season, obviously didn't have the ratings to go for more. So the sort of honeymoon that, you know, the movie was so successful, what happened to cause it to sort of like die out and then but yet make an impact to those people who cared about it? Mark D, we'll start with you. What do you feel about that?
You know, it's a deceptively sly movie. The first one is really, really clever because, you know, one of the things about that movie is that we were talking about how if it just was horror fans who were watching it, the rating would not have been, you know, a 33.4. There's just not enough horror fans to get you that kind of a rating.
Mm-hmm.
So one of the things about the movie was it has a lot of points of entry. What I mean by that is if you look at that movie and you sort of dissect it, it kind of now Jeff Rice, who wrote the original novel that it was based on, Jeff consciously said he was trying to do two things. He was basically trying, because if you look at it, the one thing that it definitely is a horror story. It's a vampire story. But if it is a vampire story, and it is, it's a very traditional one. You know, what is the basic premise of Night Stalker? A vampire invading a major city. That's Dracula. You know, that's the concept is basically Dracula. The interesting thing about Night Stalker is not the concept, but the setting, is the fact that it's set in Las Vegas, baby. They set it in the most American of towns. It's the first vampire story that actually, in a way, kind of makes sense. It's like, why does Dracula go to London when, you know, he's got all of Europe right there? Why does he risk this shit? Why does he go all this way? But this vampire goes to a city that's on his time schedule. That's, you know, it's up all night. It's a feeding frenzy for a vampire. You know, it's a smorgasbord. It's fantastic. You know, of course, a vampire. There's a lot of drifters come and go, a lot of nameless people. What a great idea. You know, the vampire story had already been set in American soil, Son of Dracula in the early 40s from Universal, and Matheson's I Am Legend, you know, so we've already had the vampire story very firmly set in American soil, but not in Las Vegas. So you've got a very traditional story. Now Jeff said he was trying to blend the old-fashioned newspaper comedy, like the front page.
Right.
You know, the kind of newspaper comedies of the 1930s, it always had Clark Gable and Frederick March, you know, the kind of always had a wisecrack for every occasion, the hard driving reporter. And what was that reporter always doing? He was always fighting with his editor in those movies, always having these fiery, screaming matches. What's at the heart of Night Stalker? You know, both book and movie. So Jeff is very consciously trying to take the front page and Dracula and sort of mix those two. And those two are very disparate influences. Yeah, and the thing about that is that, you know, you look at it and then they add a third. And the third level is almost, and this is especially true with the movie, they add almost a film noir quality to it. Because this film works as a detective story, as a mystery story. The mystery just happens to be supernatural. The killer just happens to be a vampire. But Kolchak's a reporter, but he operates like your classic Raymond Chandler, Dashiell Hammett detective throughout this. You know, it's wonderful because in the you have Darren McGavin, who had played Mike Hammer in the 50s in the Mickey Spillane series, and then he played in The Outsider. He was known for playing this kind of hard-boiled detective type. So you have three very different influences. This movie works as a mystery, hard-boiled mystery. It works film noir type of thing. It works as a sort of cinema verite vampire story, and it also works as a newspaper comedy. Folks, those three things should not go together. There's no way in hell those things should work when you put those things together. And yet it's seamless.
But they do. It works awesome.
It's absolutely seamless. And part of the reason is because Darren McGavin is perfect for all three of those.
Mhm.
Put
Mhm.
Darren
Yes.
McGavin into all three of those, and he hits all of those notes just perfectly. So we buy him as the detective, we buy him in the newspaper comedy, and we buy him as a supernatural sleuth. And that's it's so a lot of it is McGavin's performance, but a lot of it's in the writing and the fact that they, and that's why this movie did as well as it did, is because you could be a mystery fan and love this, you could be a horror fan and love this, and you could love the old newspaper comedies and love this. What amazing, so for all of those reasons, it has that immense impact right away, and then it has the impact on the people it's supposed to impact. People like little Chris Carter, who is watching this, who's
Mhm.
later going to tell anybody who asks him, I created the X-Files because the Night Stalker scared the piss out of me when I was a kid. That's the
sure.
reason I did it, and everybody else is going to say, I did this, I went on to do that because I was influenced by this amazing TV movie that there was watching. So whether people remembered it or not, how much the CBS late night brought it back or not, is really almost of secondary importance, because without Night Stalker, without Kolchak, a whole lot of things disappear later on, because a whole lot of people aren't influenced and don't go on to create some of the most influential and important horror on film and television in the 90s and beyond. So that's my short answer to that. Not so short.
Absolutely. No,
That was awesome. That was really good. We're all just sitting here like,
Yeah. We'll let you take a breath now. Mark,
I don't need to.
Mark Maddox, what about you? How do you feel about that as well? Like what is
Well, I
the
remember one time I was talking to somebody and said, to me, it felt like I said, well, this is the first time that a vampire's in the modern world, and I had people shaking their fingers at me, going, "No, there was Dracula 57 or whatever. There was this," and somebody goes, and even Dark Shadows takes place in modern times. I was like, yeah, but there's no TV set. They hardly have phones. I mean, they're isolated. It's still a gothic. It's still almost the castles and the only thing, they've got cars, okay, and they drive around the town wondering what's going on. But this was like shockingly modern. Girls killing dancing girls that were going off work. The cops with those riot helmets that they used to have, those motorcycle helmets that they used to have, getting into a fight with a guy that's super strong around a swimming pool and shooting him, and him being unstoppable. Bizarre things like finding the body of the woman who was thrown 30 yards into soft cement that had just been placed, and saying, how could that possibly be? I mean, there was all this sort of bright light of day sort of thing about the placement, and yet you've got a very feral vampire too. He's not Bela Lugosi. He's not a talker.
right?
He's basically a hisser. And Barry Otwater, who I've always loved, Star Trek, Outer Limits, all these other things he's done. While he didn't have any lines in this film, he was darn sure intense. And I do love that fight at the end. They're going at it. And at the end, you were talking about the fact that he basically commits homicide. He kills him. But what I like is when the cops kick open the door, Darren McGavin's just pounded the stake in his chest, and he's got this look on his face of like, yeah, I did it.
Yeah.
I mean, he's not even going to apologize for it. But when you go from that, and then the second film, directed by Dan Curtis, when you get to the TV series, you can almost see the beginning of the death of it, because a monster of the week, a new monster, 1 hour, and the limited thinking that I think people had back then on monster story arcs weren't in yet. That was still a ways to go. I mean, you could have had an entire show just about him chasing vampires, but they'd have the energy monster, and they'd have the werewolf. They had the headless motorcycle guy, which I actually kind of like the story of the episode. It's just the execution of the motorcycle guy is just horrible. But there's a kind of a monster of the week. And I think, and Mark knows probably a lot more about this than any of us, but I remember there was some interview with Darren McGavin or whatever, and he's standing on and waiting in front of them to do a setup, flipping his hat around, talking to some reporter and going, this isn't going to last. Like, he was already well aware of this. Here's the new monster this week, plug it in, and let's repeat the film. Nobody believes me, but I'm going to do something about it. And it seemed like he was very disillusioned. I don't know how long it was into the show, how long it had been going on. But I mean, did it start from the very beginning? Was it at the very beginning that he said this isn't going to work, or was he after like so many episodes or something?
You know, all the things that went wrong with the series would fill a book. You know,
right?
Maybe I'll write it one day. Really, the seeds of the destruction were sown right from the beginning, and under the misunderstanding that Darren agreed to do the series only if he could be the executive producer. And Universal promised that he would be the executive producer, and then immediately broke the promise and put their own producer in charge of the series. First Paul Playden and then Cy Shermack, both Universal veteran producers. Darren did not get along with either of them, and Darren acted like the executive producer on the show, even though he wasn't. But he had every right to do that because they had promised him it.
Right.
So he was acting as the executive producer on set. Paul and Cy were running things in the writer's room in the production offices. And so you had a series which was being produced under a split camp right from the start. It was war. It was open warfare right from the beginning. It was doomed. It was, Darren wasn't having any fun.
Yeah.
When Darren said it ain't going to last, that was probably wish fulfillment more than it was anything else. If Darren would tell you, and fans of the series don't want to hear this. Now I love the series, believe me.
Me too.
Anything that's got Darren McGavin in that seersucker suit to me is worth watching. Because Darren is going to make any scene sit up and dance because he's playing Carl Kolchak. Yeah. So I'm there. But the truth is that Darren didn't like the series. And that's what fans want to hear. Oh, no, he didn't like it. Yeah. Period. And, he told me flat out. He said, because people would come up to him all the time, Kolchak. And, Darren loved the original movie. Okay. Darren didn't even love the second movie. Mm-hmm. Darren thought the second movie was so imitative of the first.
I could see that. He
didn't like the fact that it followed the same story steps, And so Darren basically said, it was all well and good, but it's basically the same movie all over again. It's pretty harsh, but Darren loved the original movie. He loved everything about the original movie. And the original movie was kind of charmed. Everything went right on that movie. Yeah. Everything went just perfectly right. The shoot was a happy shoot. Everybody got along. Darren knew practically everybody he worked with on it, including the director, John Llewellyn Moxey. He'd worked with everybody. He'd worked with Cy Oakland before. He'd worked with Ralph Meeker. He'd worked with all of the only person he hadn't worked before was Carol Lindley. Was about the only person. So he was arriving at a very happy set with a lot of old friends. The shoot in Las Vegas went great. The shoot back at the Goldwyn Studios went great. Everything about that experience was a happy experience. Mm-hmm. And then things started to go off the rails in Night Strangler because Dan Curtis did not direct the first movie. And the reason he didn't direct the first movie was because he was not on board as the original producer. Everybody forgets that. Everett Chambers was the original producer. And Everett Chambers made all the early decisions on Night Stalker, including a lot of casting decisions. And then Peter Falk was Everett Chambers' good friend. He lured him away to do Columbo. They let him go. And then they thought, who are we going to get to produce it? Oh, how about the guy who did Dark Shadows?
Right. Yeah, Dan talks about that in the interview I saw, yeah.
Right, Barry Diller was running ABC Circle Films at the time. He called Dan. Dan turned him down the first time. Dan basically said, Dan had just directed the Dark Shadows movie. Yeah. And so Dan said, I'm a big-time director now. I'm not going to go back. If I can't direct it, but Barry Diller convinced him to do it. So he comes in as the producer. John Llewellyn Moxey's already hired as the director, so he can't direct. And it's driving him nuts. He's behind Moxey the whole time, grumbling under his breath to McGavin, can you believe how Moxie's got this thing set up right here? Can you believe this? So he can't wait to direct the next movie. And the problem is and Dan and Darren got along great on the first movie. They were like two yapping yard dogs on the second movie. They did not get along, and it came almost to blows at the end of the second movie. Wow. And the friendship ended on the end of the second. There was supposed to be a third movie, which was written. There was going to be a third TV movie called The Night Killers, The Night Stalker, The Night Strangler, The Night Killers, written by Richard Matheson and William F. Nolan. It was set in Hawaii, and it's odd that
with robots, right?
That's right. Humanoid androids that were replacing politicians. It had an alien. It was not only androids but aliens as well. It's odd that Chris Carter said that the X-Files was so influenced by Night, because this was the most X-Files of all stories he's never produced. Never done. So it was going to air in January of '74, but by then Dan and Darren weren't talking to each other, and the talk had shifted to doing a series. So now they do the series. Dan's not involved. Richard Matheson's not involved. And if you look at the writing credits on the Night Stalker series, and horror is very tough to do. It is one of the most difficult forms to do well, and almost nobody associated with the Night Stalker series had one iota of horror experience. It was a horror series done by rank amateurs in the field. About the only person who'd had any writing experience, the only script that was written by a true horror veteran was Horror in the Heights, and it was written by Jimmy Sangster, who'd done all the Hammer horror films.
Hammer films, yeah.
Sure.
And that's considered the best series, the best episode of the series. Guess why? It's got the best idea behind it, and it's because it came from the one true horror mind who was writing for the series. A lot of young writers were writing for the series, getting their first taste of stuff because nobody else wanted to work for the show. It was it was treated as a poor stepchild on the Universal lot. The top end was Columbo. Everybody wanted to work for Columbo. Then you worked your way down, Macmillan, McLeod, and you worked your way down. And there at the bottom of the barrel in the Universal lot, Night Stalker. And as Bob Zemeckis, who and his writing partner Bob Gale, who wrote the episode that Mark's already to Chopper, the one about the headless bicycle rider, that was their first sale. That was their very first sale. Bob Zemeckis was going to go on, Roger Rabbit and Castaway and
Back to the Future,
Forrest Gump,
so
a bunch of stuff. Yeah,
and he did it consciously. He looked around and said, "It's impossible to sell to Columbo. Everybody's trying to write for that. Nobody's trying to write for this. I'll sell something to Night Stalker." So David Chase was the story editor, going on to do The Sopranos. Michael Kozel was one of the writers, goes on to co-create Hill Street Blues. You've got a lot of wonderful young writers working on this show, and they thought they were writing a comedy. They thought they didn't know anything about horror, so they structured the whole thing like a sitcom, with Tony as sort of the angry, long-suffering father, and Carl as the the wayward son who's always getting in trouble, and Ron is the brother who's always tattling on the other brother and Miss Emily as the kindly aunt.
Ron is the Eddie Haskell of the show.
Right. So they structured the whole thing with a family of regulars that you would find not in a horror series, but in a comedy.
Yeah.
Half-hour comedy. So it out of that came a real guerrilla mentality that really gives the show a lot of charm. It's erratic as hell. The series is just up and down erratic as can be. But out of that came some very, very good episodes. If the 5 or 6 best episodes of Night Stalker are excellent. Spanish Moss Murders is a terrific episode. Horror in the Heights. There's a handful of episodes there that are just gems.
And I think you also said earlier, and I don't think you'll get any argument from anybody here, is that I think and Mike, you said it as well, is that the at the center of the love for Kolchak is Darren McGavin. Like without Darren McGavin, it all it doesn't work. Like you can watch Darren read a phone book, really, and he'll do it because he's capable of doing, like you said, comedy. He's definitely like the intensity, like all of that stuff he can bring to it and make it grounded. He can make it grounded. He can make it real. He's fun to watch. And I definitely think that that's a big proponent of, like, if people want to watch the show, like, even some of the episodes, like you said, might not be as good as others, but Darren's always like there. He's never phoning it in. Even though he might be unhappy on the set, or with what's going on behind the scenes, I don't think it ever really shows on screen.
And when Darren and
Right.
Cy Oakland tee it up,
yes,
that is also the secondarily, another match made in heaven there. Darren and Carl is one match made in heaven, but the other is Darren and Cy. Wow.
Yeah, and when he does get the chance to work with because I did like the way that both movies pull in great character actors from the golden age of Hollywood, as well as, like, people that would go on to do other things. But you can always tell when Darren has someone fun to work with in a scene. Those are always fun to watch as well. Mike, I want to ask you, like, what do you think is a lasting impression of the show or the series? Or, I know that, when we were talking about the second movie, which the second movie does sort of, and in the interview that I saw on the DVD, Dan Curtis said the point that they make the second movie was to repeat almost exactly the first movie, which, I think for me, the second movie does kind of fail a little bit in the first two acts because it is repetitive. But the third part of that, the third act that takes place all in underground Seattle, I thought was fascinating.
Yeah.
Air quotes, underground.
Well, yeah, absolutely. But I mean, it's still like, but I mean, underground Seattle is a real thing, and
very much so.
And the fact that I've never seen it used like that before.
No, it's interesting. No, it was neat because we were talking about it before we went on the air. One of the first things, the very first time I went to Seattle, I went and did the underground tour because of the Night Stalker. And it was interesting to be able to watch that and see and go through and, what they told you, a lot of the stuff they told you in this movie that, about the floods. And then then the fire was like the final straw. They decided to build up one level, and they literally took storefronts and just built the street over it and everything. A lot of the people used them as the old storefronts as the basements and items like that. And it was really cool to see that. And there's the thing with this movie was the third act of this, when he goes into the underground and it's huge buildings and it's carriages and all this stuff left down there. It's not there, at least that we can see. So, as we like to say, but
would there have been any truth to it at the time? I mean, that was quite a few years before you went. Would there have been, I'm not talking about the height. You already said it ain't that tall, but could there have been some of this other stuff, this wagon stuff back in 70, 72, 73, something like that? Could there have been? Or
no, because literally, everything that was, possible to take up, when they built over, it wasn't like it was rushed to build over,
right?
And everything. They did it over time. And
well, I will say, if it wasn't actually filmed there, that's a hell of a set for a low
nice
budget movie like that.
I really didn't know that. I mean, I wasn't sure. I'd heard of Underground Atlanta. I'd heard of Underground Seattle. I didn't know what that was, but it's my favorite thing in the film is that spooky environment.
It was amazing. It was a great shot. And a young Mike Faber, who was very disappointed leaving that tour when he didn't see those tall buildings and everything underground. But
the idea for that came from Richard Matheson, who had taken the tour. He had been in Seattle with his family on vacation, and they just beat their brains out for a second idea for another movie, and they were just kicking around different ideas left and right. It was tough. It was really tough. Well, how do we come up with something which is as good as the original movie? Because the original movie was such a great original idea. And Richard had taken that tour, and he'd squirreled it away in the back of his head. But he said right away, when he told me about how he got the idea for setting this in the Seattle Underground, he immediately said, it's not as extensive. No,
No.
he took the tour very early. I think almost as about when it started.
Mhm.
And he originally he copped out and said, once you get into the underground, imagination takes over.
Oh, of course it does.
So they actually did shoot the some scenes in Pioneer Square and in the little waiting room where everybody sits to go on the tour.
Oh, yeah.
They shot those scenes there.
That. I completely.
And once the tour starts, they were back at the Goldwyn Studios and the Bradbury Building, which was what the combination of those two were the Seattle Underground as you see it in the movie.
Oh yeah,
So,
and it was pretty amazing, how correct they got a lot of the, the jargon, the towns, and everything in it. Because a lot of times when they do, oh, we're going to Seattle, and they make up names of places or they show locations, and they did the Space Needle, they did the waterfront with the houseboats, they did, Pioneer Square and everything, and it was really awesome to see.
One of the things about Night Strangler that people don't kind of realize is Night Strangler contains a lot of odds and ends and bits and pieces that they were cut from the first movie.
Really?
I can see that.
So there are story steps in Night Strangler because, the original movie is tight. I mean, it was made for a 90-minute time slot, so it only runs about 70 minutes.
Yeah.
So that movie moves like a house of fire. And consequently, they had to cut all these different story steps that were in Jeff's original book and in Richard's original script. Like, the idea of bringing in hiring a student to do a police sketch of the suspect. That's in Night Stalker. That's in the book, and it was going to be in the movie. The idea of the character they call Professor Crabwell that Margaret Hamilton plays. That character is Kirsten Helms, works at the University of Las Vegas in the book, and there was no room for her. So there's dialogue, there's scenes, and there's all these little items that really were meant for Night Stalker that end up at Night Strangler, because they finally got a chance to use it.
Is the original book is that worth a read?
I think so.
Okay.
I think Jeff did a great. Kolchak's different in the original book. Jeff wrote the book and finished it in October of 1970. So you were saying, what's the 50th anniversary? Is it when Jeff finished the book? Well, then it's not. It would have been 2020. Would have been is it the first movie? Well, that's 1972. So 2022 would be. Is it the series?
When you say the book, that's the Kolchak tapes, right?
Kolchak Papers was the original.
Papers, that's right.
The Kolchak Tapes was going to be the original title of the movie,
That's
when they finally settled on Night Stalker. But the book is, I think the book is excellent. I really do. And but Kolchak's different. He's a little bit heavy set. He's of Romanian. Darren at some point decided that Kolchak was Polish and made a couple references to it along the line. In Jeff's book, it's very clear that Kolchak is Romanian. So there are differences. He doesn't dress in the seersucker suit. That was Darren's choice. Darren came up with the seersucker suit because that's how he remembered reporters dressing in New York in the summer when he was an actor in New York. That was sort of the summer outfit for reporters. So
he's got everything but the sort of press little sticker on his hat, right?
Jeff, in his book, he dressed Kolchak more like a reporter. He knew reporters would, like in chinos and bush jackets and things, because reporters like pockets. They like having pockets all over the place, So
pull all their notes out of.
He put Kolchak in sort of how a Las Vegas reporter would have dressed. Richard's script. Richard, for some reason, thought it would be fun to make him even more idiosyncratic, and he put Kolchak in Bermuda shorts and Hawaiian shirts, and and Darren read that and said, "No reporter dresses like that." And then he remembered, what did reporters wear in the summer in New York? And to his idea, this guy is wearing the same suit that he wore when he got fired from the New York newspaper and had to go to Las Vegas. That hasn't changed his wardrobe in all these years. The suit was. See, that's an actor thinking. Actors always invent backstories for their characters, and they can't get rid unless they get the right hat and the right until they're perfect. They got to feel it from within. That's what Darren did. So a great deal of, a lot of what's Kolchak is in Jeff's book. A lot of the DNA is in Jeff's book. And Jeff based the character of Kolchak on a reporter named Alan Jarlson, who had worked for the Las Vegas Sun with Jeff, and on himself. Jeff sort of drew on himself and Alan Jarlson to create the character. And then Darren comes along and imprints his own personality and his own choices on it. And that's where it really just takes off. That's magic time. There are these moments where you have the right actor meeting the right role.
Yeah.
And it's just, you can't beat that. You just cannot beat that combination. When that chemistry works, look out.
And I know that you've had extensive interviews with him, Mark. Did Darren appreciate the fondness for the character in the series?
He was as fond of the character as anybody, and so was his wife, Kathy Brown. Kathy was one of the first to say that that the character of Carl Kolchak probably had more of Darren in it than almost any other role he'd ever played.
Oh, nice.
That he brought so much of himself to that role. So she was very fond of the character. He was very fond of the character, and he was very appreciative of fans being a fan of the character. He couldn't understand why anybody who loved the first movie also would love the series. That was Darren's argument. Darren's argument was like, how can you like something that is that good?
Yeah.
and it's like, and he didn't see, because he's, Kolchak operates in different universes. Jeff's book is one universe.
Mm-hmm.
They're all connected, but they're not quite the same. And then the movie is different from Jeff's book. The second movie is different from the first movie. And the series is different from everything else that was before it. They all share a lot of things. They all share Darren. They all share this incredible quest for the truth. But the feeling of the series is different from the feeling of the movie. There's an entirely different feel to it.
I was wondering, I don't know what years you were talking to Mr. McGavin. Would there be a thing where he was watching television a decade after Kolchak, or 15 or 20 years after Kolchak, and go, the way television is formatted now, the Night Stalker could have worked with story arcs or the way we're allowed to be a little more intense? Nothing like that. It was just, because to me, I always thought the Monster of the Week thing is kind of what killed it. And then they finally, about the time they got into Punch from Chips being bringing back a mummy, I was just sort of like, or Richard Kyle strangling people in an Indian outfit. That's sort of like, we're kind of running out of monsters here.
See, I don't know. There's a lot of debate, and there should be, and there's no good answer to it. But certainly, the Monster of the Week was going to turn on itself at some point, but largely because of the way they were doing it. See, I'm a proponent that anything can work as long as it's done well and done right by the right people.
Yes.
I mean, most fantasy ideas, if you say them out loud, sound silly.
Yeah.
If you break any fantasy idea down to, okay, we're going to do this thing where a scientist has an island and he's cloned dinosaurs, and he's got dinosaurs, and we're going to pick, you think like, well, that sounds stupid. That sounds like, you can't, like, well, no, it's Jurassic Park. It's going to be great. Believe me. It's how you execute. It's how it's what you do with the idea. You can't do Monster of the Week unless you have people of the caliber of Richard Matheson and Robert Bloch and people like that doing the stories.
Yeah.
So, but also, another problem was the time, Mark, as you correctly said. The one thing this series did not do was the first thing any horror series would do today. They did not think out a mythology to support the series.
Right.
And there's always this kind of question of, okay, this guy encountered a vampire in Las Vegas. Okay, I'll buy that. Then he gets a killing alchemist in Seattle. Now this is a little, odd that he would just go to one more city and find one more. Then in Chicago, it's a vampire, it's a zombie, it's an alien, it's every week it's something. After a while it becomes, we've got to stop meeting like this.
Yeah.
After a while it's
it's still better than Jaws 4.
But you ask yourself, you ask yourself the question. Remember, Dan Curtis's two major franchises in some ways are Night Stalker and Dark Shadows.
Right.
And neither one answered the question of why does this keep happening? What is it about this town in Maine that attracts all of these things? And what is it about this guy that attracts all these things? Now, that's the first thing you would do today. I mean, if you do Buffy, it's over a hellmouth. Okay, I'll buy it. That's fine. You know, if it's X-Files, there's a conspiracy. Okay, all right. Grimm, you know, his job, Supernatural. It's their job to go out and hunt this stuff.
Right.
But they never came up with a supporting story of any kind to explain what it was about Kolchak that seemed to just attract every supernatural element that was out there, no matter where he was.
Yeah.
So,
in a way, it ended up becoming a repeat of that first movie over and over and over and over. That's what it was.
Right.
Yeah.
So, I mean, you know, and that's, I mean, horror puts enough strain on the suspension of disbelief. You know, horror, because horror is always about unreal things.
Right.
So right there, it's asking you to buy into things which are, you know, well, we're going to buy that there's something that sleeps in a coffin all day, gets up at night and goes and drinks blood. You know, all right, you know, I'll go along with you. Right. You know, the problem with this is when it happens over and over and over again, you just have to hit the reset button and say, you know,
and it's one of the reasons why a lot of movies in general, horror movies, fantasy movies, whatever you want to call it, have problems because the sequels get more watered down and worse and worse and worse as they go on. So, and that's what, you know, that's what you're seeing here. Man, I wish we didn't have to wrap it up so soon, but I just want to get as we tail out of this, just real quick, I want to get your takes on whether or not you feel like this is just a thing that happened that has a huge influence, or is it a property? Is it a franchise that's worth revisiting in some way, rebooting, whatever they want to call it, the kids today? Mike, I'm going to start with you. You're just shaking your head. I want to. You're like, no Darren McGavin, no Kolchak.
They did reboot it, and it was horrible.
Right.
It was, you know, they did it the middle of last decade, and they tried adding more backstory to Kolchak, and it was just not good, and it had no resemblance other than the name Carl Kolchak.
Yeah, it started.
There's a reason for that.
Stuart Townsend.
Yeah,
but it's not what you think it is. And if I go ahead and revamp the Night Stalker companion, and I will tell the story, because there's a lot of 2 and 2 equaling 5 when people talk about that remake. And what went wrong is not what you think went wrong.
Okay,
I think
interesting. Looking forward.
I think it might be possible if the creative team was to set it at the same time frame instead of trying to update it. But the problem is that they'd have to find somebody as charismatic and as capable as Darren McGavin, and that would not be easy. So I don't think the premise alone.
Ruffalo.
Yeah, what's that?
Mark Ruffalo.
I don't know. One who is, he's always talked about for Columbo. Everybody always another role that people argue about whether they should ever redo. You know, that
you need somebody who writes who does do the drama and the comedy almost at the same time. And once again, you get somebody with McGavin's abilities. There's like Mark says, you find the right person, get the person with that talent. You know, but anyway.
But so, is it something that you guys would like to see, or nah, just leave alone?
Leave it alone.
Oh, I'll shock everybody. I'm not opposed to it.
I'm not opposed to it either. Just get the damn thing right.
Right.
That's all I'm asking.
I'll tell you the reason I'm not opposed to it. You know, and I say the same thing about Columbo because I get this question on the Columbo side, because one of my books is about Columbo.
Right.
So I get this question all the time, and I say, you know, and people say, no. Peter Falk's the only person who could ever play Columbo. He's the only person I ever could, you know. And I say, well, look, do you think Columbo's a great character? It's yeah. I think he's one of the great mystery characters of all time, one of the great detective characters of all time. Well, if that's the case, then he's Hamlet. And in that case, he's open to interpretation.
Mm-hmm.
If he's not a great character, what the hell are you afraid of? Go ahead and let it be reinterpreted. We've heard this argument for more than 100 years on Sherlock Holmes.
Yeah.
William Gillette, who you don't know, was the first person who played Sherlock Holmes on stage with Conan Doyle's permission, And for decades, people said William Gillette's the only person who can play Sherlock Holmes. Nobody else could ever play it until Basil Rathbone came along. And then it was, well, Basil Rathbone's the only person who can play it until Jeremy Brett came along, or Peter Cushing, or Benedict Cumberbatch, or Robert Downey Jr. Look at all of the great Holmes interpretations we've had.
I like Frank Langella's the Gillette one they did on HBO. I thought that was a lot of fun.
Dracula's been up for reinterpretation. Holmes has been up for reinterpretation. All the great characters. I think, yes. I'm not saying it would work. I'm just saying I'm not opposed to trying. You would have to have the right team, the right actor, and you'd have to have somebody who would not remind you of Darren McGavin, but had all of the qualities of Kolchak. Somebody who was a young Bryan Cranston could have done it. A young Bryan Cranston who can play dark, who could play smartass, who looks like he's had some life and had his face kicked in a couple times by life. Somebody like that could have done that. You could have gotten an actor who doesn't remind you of it. A young Jeff Goldblum, who can do smartass forever, has genre credits. You'd buy him as a reporter. Look at him in Jurassic Park. He's got a sense of humor. He can do action. He could have been a different kind of Kolchak, but I'm not opposed to people giving it a try.
Okay.
Because if it is a great part, if it is a great role, the odds of all those things coming together are great. The odds of having the right team behind him that knows what, like a few years ago, Johnny Depp wanted to do it. And we had a deal at Disney. He was going to play Kolchak. Edgar Wright was going to direct.
Oh.
And, they had this whole team. I think they actually had a script written. And, the problem was, I didn't see Johnny Depp in the part.
No.
I did not in any way, shape, or form see Johnny Depp.
Yeah, sometimes he gets in his own way. Yeah.
That are necessary to play Kolchak.
Yeah.
You can't play Kolchak like Willy Wonka. He's a very blue collar.
No.
And Johnny Depp is anything but blue collar.
Yes.
Type. So, but I can think of a lot of actors younger who are now probably too old to play. Remember, Darren was 49 when he played the part.
Yep. Yeah, I know. I was very reminded of that when I was watching
younger.
it. I was like, man, he's playing younger. He played,
I think about 4 or 5 years
younger a lot.
You buy Carl in his early 40s in that first.
I was watching a live science fiction television show they had on YouTube. I don't know, it was Science Fiction Theater or one of those, and Darren McGavin is the star of that episode. I guess it's live back in the early to mid 50s, and he's bald.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, he was bald back then, so you knew that he was coming into Kolchak with his rug. He was coming in, and he had to be quite a bit older. I was like really surprised that far back that he looked as old as he did in the early 50s.
Yeah. I mean, I thought he looked. I was surprised actually to find out that I'm like, wow, I'm older than he was when he played Kolchak.
I thought he was much older.
Yeah,
but
healthy. He always seemed healthy. He was always.
I mean, he was in his 60s when he did. He was in his 60s when he did the father in Christmas Story, and I don't think he doesn't feel like he's 60 there.
No,
like he doesn't. He feels pretty young. So
it's amazing.
Anyway, sorry guys. As much as we'd like to talk about Darren McGavin's Fountain of Youth, and the fact that you want to watch these early movies, like you can see him like shirtless and everything. So he's working out. Let's it's been so amazing to talk and reflect about the Night Stalker with you guys. I really appreciate it. And we are going to take a quick break, and then we're going to come back and we're going to close out the show.
Okay. There will not be a YouTube bonus tonight.
Probably because it already happened, didn't it?
Well, no, the show went too long. So
that's what I mean. It was like sort of there.
Yep.
Tends to do when I'm on the panel.
It's good information.
That's okay.
Yeah.
All right. Let's close up the show then, and let's get ready about this. And okay, hold on. All right. 3, 2. So that's going to wrap up another episode of the Air Station One podcast. I want to thank everybody for joining us. Mark D, thank you so much for being here tonight. You were a fountain of information. This was awesome.
It overfloweth.
Yeah. That's one word for it.
Anything you want to promote or, shout out about?
I'll add one thing because we talked about the Seattle Underground. For a lot of writers, they're say, well, I could win this award or that, and I've never been big on that, any of that kind of stuff. To me, the reward is when somebody comes up to you and says, I read your book or I read that story, and it's really terrific. But one of the great things that to me was better than any kind of award was when somebody came up to me and told me they took the Seattle Underground tour, and they said, and they're selling your book there.
Nice.
That was better.
Awesome.
I said, I don't need any. I said, that's all I need to hear. I said, that's aces. That's worth any award you could possibly get.
And for those people who are just listening to this, he just showed the book. It's Night Stalking, Kolchak Companion.
Well, actually, that's Night Stalker Companion. That's the second.
That's the second one. Gotcha.
Night Stalker Companion. So this was the second one. This is 97.
Cool.
That is awesome. Well, that makes sense that they're selling that one at the Underground instead.
Well, not now, but this was back.
You go there now,
back
they'll go like, what? I don't know what you're talking about, dude. But thank you, Mark. It's been awesome. And Mr. Maddox, thank you, sir.
Thanks for having me on. This went way too fast. We got to talk about we talk about the first film, a little bit about the second one. How about having us on next Halloween to talk about the actual episodes? I'd like to do a breakdown of favorites and unfavorites. I've got my own.
I think that's going to need to be its own podcast.
It's going to be its own series. But I appreciate you having me on.
Earth Station Kolchak.
Yeah.
Or in this case, it could be another 8 years until we do it again.
Well, the thing is, I've been lucky to be able to do some Kolchak covers for Moonstone. I did their first comic, Kolchak the Night Stalker Files, their comic book cover for that. And I'll probably be doing some more for Moonstone. I also got to do the cover for the Kino Lorber box set of the TV series. I was sorry I didn't get in touch with them soon enough to try to do the first two films. I would have loved to have done those too. But Mark was also involved with that Blu-ray set, so I was very impressed with the look of it. I started watching and going, I guess the restoration's okay. And then I started realizing all these makeup doesn't hide acne on people's faces anymore the way it used to in the 70s, and sweat and glistening skin and shabby stuff and hastily built sets and things like that. And I thought, boy, this is amazing. I mean, they did a really, really good job. And there's tons of extras on there. Now, I didn't realize it was now out of print. Is that right?
I know that it's difficult to get. I know that every time Kino Lorber has one of their sales, which they're just about to do, it's not one among them. So
wow. Okay. But I was honored to be able to work on that, and I was glad that Mark got to be able to work on it as well. If anybody should have been on that set, it should have been him. So that was great.
That is awesome, sir. That is really, really awesome. And Mr. Mike, we've made it through another one, my friend.
We did, and as always, it's my pleasure.
Anything you're going to shout out about?
Yeah, I'm going to shout out, like I said, our good friend Bobby Nash and some other friends of the station contributed to the new Moonstone collection, the 50th anniversary. The hardcover is awesome. It's great. Like I said, it's $50, but you can get the soft cover a lot cheaper. And I definitely recommend anybody who's interested in Kolchak check it out because it's full of really, really fun stories. And I had a great time reading it. It goes into his history, so it goes into a lot of things that I don't know what canon is as far as Kolchak goes, so I don't know how much of this is really canon or not, but it's interesting creativity nonetheless, and some of the art is just beautiful. J.K. Woodard does a lot of the art on this, including the variant cover that I have, which is a Batman tribute, but it's a solid read, and I would imagine that Moonstone is probably the only place that you can go to get more Kolchak stuff in the future. So check out Moonstone. We'll have a link in our show notes for them.
Excellent. My shout out real quick is going to be our friends, the Misbehavin Maidens. They are no longer with us because they performed their last show. But those who were not in Northern Virginia and couldn't attend their last show, you could now be part of it. That's right, folks. The Misbehavin Maidens are releasing their last show live they're releasing it on CD and also for download. You can actually order it from their website, misbehavinmavens.com. We'll have a link for it up in our show notes. And for only $20, you can actually be part of the show. And it's pretty awesome. And, you could listen to it all the time. And it's a ton of fun. And it's, for a good cause, because they were a bunch of amazing young ladies and they were so frippin' talented. And I wish they would have stayed together because they were just great and had plenty of times to see them at Dragon Con and a couple other places. So it's definitely worth checking out. And, like I said, we'll have it in our show notes. All right, that's going to wrap up tonight's episode. Thank you, as always, for listening to the Earth Station One podcast. Always remember, we couldn't do this without you. If you want to support a podcast, please check out the Tee-Public store and get some really cool ESO Network swag. We're going to have some new designs up there really, really soon. I've got, already on the drawing board, 3 or 4 new t-shirt ideas, and so those will be coming up. Also, remember, if you want to listen to our show before the rest of the world, why not join the ESO Network Patreon? For as little as $1 a month, you can help support us here at Earth Station One. Check out us out at patreon.com/ESO Network. We also want to hear from you. Please write us anytime at feedback@earthstation1.com. Remember, you can also find Earth Station One wherever fine podcasts are found. And now Earth Station One can also be found in video format up on YouTube. And as a little bonus for watching us up on video, we now have bonus material, except for on this episode, because we just went a little long tonight. That's cool. But you can, if you sign up at our YouTube channel, you can get some of the bonus stuff, and it doesn't cost you anything extra. Just hit like and subscribe, as we like to say. If you made it this far into the episode, you know what? Why not tell your friends and tell your neighbors and, subscribe, leave feedback, give us a thumbs up. It's always a good thing to do. On behalf of myself, of course, Mike and Mark and Mark. Thank you, guys. It's pretty awesome. Stay spooky, and we will see you next time here on Earth Station One. Boom, we are done.
You're listening to the ESO Network, your station for all things geek.